Corla. And Minister, this morning I want to raise with you serious concerns around child protection and children's welfare that have been highlighted in a report released today by UCD's Sexual Exploitation Research Programme, SERP, and their study in relation to young women and children in state care and in residential care homes. Their study really makes for very distressing reading. It provides a very alarming account of the targeting and sexual exploitation of children and teenagers in state care, exploitation that has been carried out by coordinated gangs. And the harrowing findings in the research detail cases of girls being taken by taxi from residential care homes to hotels where they were then sexually exploited and abused. And the report's authors, and you may have heard Ruth Breslin speaking on this morning, the report's authors describe an appalling vista of cars lining up at night outside residential care homes, state-funded, state-run residential care homes, waiting for young women and girls to come out so they can be taken away. It appears to be systemic and orchestrated abuse, and it's an appalling finding. And indeed, what's also appalling is the perception that emerges from within the study that authorities have grown tired of dealing with so-called problematic young girls in care being reported missing. That's quite simply not good enough. These girls are at high risk of sexual exploitation and of abuse, and indeed TUSLA has accepted that it failed to keep children safe and has said this is in part due to an insufficient supply of residential places to allow children at risk to move elsewhere to a place of greater safety. Now, Minister, I used to represent children in state care many years ago in the late 90s, early noughties. And then there was a real scarcity of residential places to keep children safe in these situations. We're now a prosperous country, and I've just listened to you outlining, the benefits of prosperity and what is effectively full employment. But it's appalling, therefore, that now in 2023 we're still seeing a lack of places where children can be kept safe. So, Minister, my first question echoes that of Tanya Ward, CEO of the Children's Rights Alliance, who's asked in response to this report how many cases of suspected abuse of children in state care have been passed on to TUSLA or the Gardaí. Has the government been monitoring these awful cases? And does the government's reported new focus on poverty and child poverty in particular include these concerns in its scope? And as Minister for Finance, how do you propose to address the funding problems reported by TUSLA, which are leaving children so exposed to exploitation? I heard earlier today you announced that every worker in the state will receive a tax cut in the budget this October. But Minister, how about we guarantee instead that every child in the state will receive an appropriate home, a place of safety and a home? Because this government has an appalling record also on child homelessness. And some years ago, Jan O'Sullivan introduced the Homeless Families Bill, which would prioritise the rights of children at risk of homelessness. Would you address the needs of homeless children in a meaningful way by accepting our report, our bill? And what do you propose to do in response to this report by UCD's SERP Centre today?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Bacik. And at the outset, I just want to say that the report and its findings, what's contained within it, is deeply shocking, is disturbing to think that there are any individual examples of that kind of behaviour and practice happening in Ireland now or in the past. And I just want to assure you and the House and the general public that this will be treated with the utmost seriousness, which of course it absolutely deserves. So we welcome the fact that this scoping study on the sexual exploitation of children and young people in Ireland has been conducted by UCD. And I want to say that the Department of Children is working closely with TUSLA senior management on the subject of child sexual exploitation, and is now going to prioritise a review of the findings of this scoping study and its recommendations in the immediate period ahead, as you would expect, and as is right and proper. The study is a very important piece of research into the sexual exploitation of children by potential organised groups of predatory men in our society, and close liaison into the study's findings will also take place by TUSLA within Garda Síochána, and Minister O'Gorman's department will also work with the Department of Justice to review the findings and the recommendations of this report. I acknowledge that the scoping study outlines that the interviews as part of the research took place 3 years ago. I should point out that in the interim period, a number of important developments have taken place in this area as a key priority to assist with the reporting of child sexual exploitation, and I've got a whole list of measures laid out here by the Department, steps that have been taken since then, but I don't think it's really the day to be going into those. I acknowledge the scoping study, the contents are shocking. On the question of funding, I think it will be readily acknowledged by Minister O'Gorman, by TUSLA, that in the last couple of years we have seen a step change in their funding. In the budgets that I would have negotiated with Minister O'Gorman, as is right and proper, because the truth is that the needs are growing and society is becoming more diverse, more complex. We have more minors, more children coming into Ireland. It is the case, as you know, through your work, that all unaccompanied minors who arrive into Ireland are referred by the Department of Justice officials to TUSLA's team for separated children seeking international protection. But one of the first and most important duties of any state is to protect our children. And we will certainly work with you, with everyone in the House and with all of the key stakeholders to make sure that the content of this study is very carefully examined and is responded to in the most forceful way we possibly can.
Well, Minister, thank you for your response, and it's good to hear the Government is working to implement measures in response to these alarming findings from the SERP study. That's very welcome. Clearly, you know, the focus of this report is about a child's right to be safe and a child's right to have a safe home. And I would say again, a government that was serious about guaranteeing that right for every child should be prioritising moving children out of homelessness, and should be prioritising not only addressing these very stark findings around children in residential care, but also about addressing the real crisis facing the thousands of children who are currently in homelessness. And that should be the key priority, above and beyond tax cuts. And may I also raise, Minister, you know, issues around discrimination against children go more broadly than this, because, you know, back in December on the Committee on Gender Equality, we recommended a constitutional referendum to provide for a more inclusive definition of family, to cover families that are not just based on marriage, families, for example, with same-sex parents who are not married, families headed by single parents. And I would like to ask, Minister, what the Government are doing on that referendum on the inclusive definition of family, with the focus on ensuring that children in non-constitutionally protected families are receiving appropriate protections and rights. And again, it's about that focus on a child's right and a child's right to safety. So the constitutional referendum and Labour's Homeless Families Bill.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. On the question of a referendum, the relevant Cabinet Committee is actively working on this issue, and there's a meeting of that Cabinet Committee today, this afternoon, as I understand it, and it will be given further consideration, and there will be engagement across the House and, of course, public confirmation of any final decision in relation to that particular issue. I should say on the question of child trafficking that since early last year, TUSLA has partnered with the anti-child trafficking organisation MECPATS to raise awareness and to provide frontline staff across their services with training on child trafficking in Ireland, therefore increasing the agency's capacity to respond to what is an evolving area of need, and indeed an increasing area of need given the migration crisis that is developing across the world. As you know, there is a joint protocol in place as well between Garda Síochána and TUSLA, and where family reunification is not possible, TUSLA will place the child in a placement with a foster family in a residential care unit or supported lodgings that meet their particular needs. But I think in light of today's study, we will have to examine all of those issues, and Minister O'Gorman and TUSLA will now be working as a priority on a response to this UCD study.